My name is Ciaran McConnell, and I'm a part-time pro wrestler and former promoter, and I've been around the job for 15 years. I'm really looking forward to tonight. It's the first time singles with Frankie Sloan, and it's under sort of a variation of traditional Mount Evans rules, which I'm a big proponent of.
And could you just explain that to the camera for like kind of the viewer kind of thing? Like obviously it's more traditional British wrestling rules.
Yeah. So Mount Evans era wrestling, some people call it the World of Sport style. World of Sport was like a magazine sports show that was on ITV from 1965 to 1985. But the style actually sort of predates that. After the Second World War, a guy called Edward Evans, first Baron Mount Evans, sponsored a rule set sort of similar to Marcus of Queensberry in boxing to kind of legitimise pro wrestling, because before that it was all kind of what you'd call all-in wrestling. So there weren't very many rules. It was just sort of a spectacle of violence, if you like. But then after the Second World War, they needed things to put out, cheap entertainment. With the advent of television, very, very cheap to produce because the shows were already going on. You just needed to take cameras and film it, and as part of the bid to give it a bit more credibility, Edward Evans sponsored these rules. So it's two pinfalls, 2 submissions, or a knockout to decide the winner, contested tonight over 5 5-minute rounds.
And is there any reason in particular Infinite kind of wants to go for that style? Is it just kind of a kind of legacy thing, or is it the anything that storytelling wise that lends itself to the match? Or?
Well, there are different stories you can tell. When I ran Infinite many years ago, one of the things that me and Jack, my business partner at the time, wanted to do was to reintroduce that style, because if you look at all of the other countries around the world that had a strong wrestling identity, like Japanese wrestling, Mexican wrestling, the American style, they have all evolved. Whereas, and I think that this is a quirk of the fact that Americans speak English, is that when B Sky B and Sky first came to prominence, they syndicated a lot of American wrestling, and that happened just as the ITV cancelled traditional British wrestling. So the space was filled with the American style, and then in the space of sort of 10 years, the identity of British wrestling was lost. Whereas if you go to Mexico, there are still luchadors. You go to Japan, there's still an evolution of strong style and things like that with the martial arts influences. Wrestling in this country, its identity was kind of subsumed into the American pantomime, if you like, which was obviously done incredibly successfully well. But back in 2012, we wanted to reintroduce British wrestling, which would have, we think, evolved if it had stayed in people's minds.
And how was those years promoting Infinite? Because you were a massive part of it, I remember. From 2012 onwards, you were the on-screen general manager of sorts, weren't you?
Yeah, all by accident. And
yeah.
I must sometimes.
Well, how did that come about?
Well, this is I get a bit of a bad rap from some people for injecting myself into things, but there's a couple of things. The first thing is our first show. 2 minutes before the show was due to start, I kind of went round the dome, if you remember the building, there's a big auditorium. Mm-hmm. Went around that twice looking for our ring announcer, only to discover that her and her team had a row with the venue staff and just decided to go home. So I kind of went back to my business partner and said, she's gone. And he said, oh, well, you'll have to do it then. So I was intent on just being backstage and managing that, because that's one of the things that people don't understand, I think, is just how much running about backstage stuff needs to be done. But there was only me, half formally dressed, to go out and MC. And then sort of a few months later, there was a main event bout where all of our referees were knocked out in the bout. And the only person with the stroke to go in and count the fall was me. And so all of a sudden people know, all right, you must run the place. And then the other thing is, because wrestling is independent in this country and no one's on retainer, it's very, very difficult to have unique assets. You can use people in a certain way. You can get people used to how you use people they might see elsewhere in a way distinct to you, but there are very few sort of unique assets. So for better or worse, I became a unique asset. And when we started, it was we were a year after Progress had started, and we were basically at the, I suppose what you'd say the beer of the bank, if you like. We were the ones that we were in the north, with all due respect to firms that predated us. We were a shot in the arm. GPW were a phenomenal organisation, Future Shock a phenomenal organisation, but they were quite content in their home grounds, if you like, the Masonic in Stockport and the Monaco in Wigan. And then we came along in Liverpool and introduced that to Liverpool. So all of a sudden there was sort of must-see shows in the area, more must-see shows in the area.
And how come the change sort of from that original idea of like the British rounds rules matches to the sort of, I guess, a little bit more pantomime aspects, the fusion of it though? How'd that come about, and why do you think it came about?
The rounds matches, the Mount Evans style, were always supposed to be a feature of the show. So I think on our first show we had 2, and everything else was all in. We had a league format, which I think we bit off more than we could chew with that, because you don't realise how many matches you have to have in the league for everyone to be able to. I think the first league would have lasted about 12 years if the amount of shows we were promoting. But that was something that we became quite synonymous for, again, updating that style, because people, again, misunderstand the idea of Mount Evans wrestling. They either think of Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks, or they think about Johnny St. Steve Gray. And both of those in different ways are great examples of their individual styles. But there's also Ken of Nagasaki, Pat Roach, the crowd, the heavyweight mat workers as well, and the characters of Skull Murphy, Pete Roberts, people like that. So that was always to be a feature of the show, but also we knew that the style that people were used to was, perhaps that indie style, but also with the elements of story, because, I know this is hotly contested, but if I can say, I'm very much sort of with Eric Bischoff on this, that you need your stories. It's the stories that sell things. You can have great matches, but and they're massively important, maybe, and they stand the test of time. But for every, we remember Rock Austin in the ring, but we also remember Rock Austin with the beer truck. The stories are what draw you in. So that's that's very much what we wanted to do, was to do quality wrestling, quality stories, and introduce the British style.
And how was it at the time? Like, how did it feel being in that sort of period of that, success of British wrestling? And how does it feel to see, a lot of the wrestlers that you had on those shows go on and do different things, within the industry?
It's one of those things that I've only just really started now to not think about what could have been and to enjoy what was, because obviously we had a good run of maybe 3 years, and then the market became, I would say, more saturated, and it's harder to be it's harder to build, and there were other things that sort of went on that I wouldn't go into, but I spent a lot of time thinking, if we could have done this, all the stories that didn't come to fruition, we didn't get to finish. Whereas, I was recently in the company of Danny Hope, who was sort of my longest running champion, and CJ Banks as well, and got to thinking about just how good those good days were, and now having relinquished the reins and being able to look back with fondness and with no skin in the game anymore. Really, I just enjoy keeping my hand in with the lads. I can look back and think, that was good, and it was very good.
It must have been quite difficult letting go of something that is so kind of if you've been involved so deeply in something for so long, like on an emotional level, that must have been quite hard for you. Or was it a relief? Or was it
a bit of both? I think I did have that the difficulty you talk about earlier on, and perhaps when the pandemic hit, you shouldn't look back with regrets, but that would potentially have been a time to say, I'll free myself of this now. But no one knew how long that was going to go on for. But now I find myself, when I have conversations with the lads that have taken over from me, I enjoy feeding them ideas. It's up to them whether they take them, and it's nice to be creative and to get in. And as I say, never when I was promoting for myself would I get the opportunity to step in the ring with Frankie Sloan for a Mount Evans era match. I said in the promo recently, when Frankie debuted, when he had his first match, I was 11 months old. So to be in the ring with someone that was once in the ring with giant haystacks, I wouldn't have been able to say it. I wouldn't be able to say that if I was still running the place. So there is more of an element of relief, especially when you see the next generation sort of taking it and running with it. And the fact that it's a major compliment that they didn't just start their own firm, but they wanted to continue Infinite Promotions, and life's not all about legacy, but I suppose if there is a legacy, the lad's taking that name on, is it?
They were definitely mentioning it before when we were speaking to Luke Jacobs and stuff. It was very much appreciative of that Infinite name kind of thing coming through. It was definitely a key point. Kind of coming on to, we talked about you being in the ring now kind of thing. And you had Frankie Sloan tonight. Was that always, I assume you've had some kind of desire to be in the wrestling business for a long held. So was it always in the ring behind what was your ambition kind of before getting in? What was it that kind of...
The thing that popped me most when I was a kid, sort of 8-9 years old, was when, say, Vince McMahon would would announce an edict in the ring, and then Shawn Michaels' music would hit, and the commissioner would come out and change things. Or, funny person to be a fan of maybe, but when Linda McMahon would come in and say, no, I'm the CEO. And it was those, and that actually attracted me to the idea of promoting, probably before I knew what promoting was, that got me. But then obviously, I've always popped for Steve Austin. I loved Undertaker, X-Pac and Kane were probably my favourite tag team as a child, because of the Odd Couple. And they've sort of influenced me. So I don't know if I ever envisaged myself actually working between the ropes as much as being around the business. And I'm not, I'm not the new incarnation of Luthez by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not. I'm a worker. I wouldn't necessarily consider myself an athlete, which is probably not good. Probably does the business down a little bit. But the opportunity to be in and to tell stories and to put holds on and make people feel, before I started wrestling, I had a little bit of experience in stand-up comedy. I've always performed, I sing, things like that. So the ability to make people feel is probably what attracted me to it. To have, even as a promoter, I think there was one time we had, 700 people in the dome for a steel cage match, and they were all on the feet. And I was like, I wrote that. I put that together. And of course, most of that was down to the lads executing the vision. That doesn't sound terribly pretentious, but to make 700 people who've got things going on in their life feel sort of that level of ecstasy and joy in and anger as well to some degree, because of something you've put down on paper is that's some thrill. It's a very, very difficult thing to communicate until you've seen it and you look back and you think, I did that. So I'm not one for I don't do get big-headed or feeling proud, but that's some accomplishment. So it's probably that.